unpleasant, it's confrontational, and it's something that people just don't like to do. They don't want to get involved in it. And as a result of that preconceived notion, they tend not to go get training for it, and they tend not to solve that problem. They just go around for a lifetime with negotiaphobia.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because so often, especially with women, we leave money on the table because we just are afraid to upset that apple cart when in fact it's really something that you're going to show us that can be so collaborative. Why don't you define negotiation?
Well, a negotiation is the often ongoing process through which two or more parties whose positions are not consistent work in an effort to reach an agreement. Pretty good definition of negotiation.
Well, and that's the thing. We all think it's always competitive, and today, in the next 27 to 30 minutes, we're going to talk about how that is not the case. So why don't you tell us what really is negotiaphobia, and why has it reached such epidemic proportions?
Well, there are a couple of reasons for that, Terry. One is that the belief is that almost all negotiations is confrontational, very competitive in nature, and that's what makes it so unpleasant. When the fact is there are four types of negotiation strategies which we set forth in our research and in our work here, that some of which are fun and certainly win-win in nature, but again, the stereotypical image of negotiations is so negative and confrontational that people don't want to go there. So that's one of the things we're trying to overcome with this material that we've put forth in the marketplace on the 1 Minute Negotiator. So by definition, negotiaphobia is a fear of negotiating based on limited experience, discomfort with uncertainty, and a lack of skill. See, one of the greatest ways to feel good about something is to be good at it, because when you're skillful, it gives you confidence to go forward. And unless people have had some really good negotiations training, they don't have all those skill sets that will enable them to confidently go into the arena.
And one of the top outtakes or takeouts from this book, the tips, is that there can be a fairly easy process. And I'd like to put in at this moment, when we wrote the book, The 1 Minute Negotiator, we did a lot of extra work on women and negotiating. And one of the issues we always have is adaptability. And you're going to go into that, how we really work with an easy process. Why don't you tell us what that is?
Well, first the backstory, because it's really kind of funny. Dr. George Lucas and I wrote this wonderful book, and we worked on it for about 3 years. We had a publisher lined up, Barrett Kohler, a great publishing house out of San Francisco. We sent the manuscript to Steve Piersanti, the CEO and publisher, and he called us about 10 days later, and he said, "Don, I got good news and bad news." I said, well, tell me, Steve, what's going on? He said, the good news is this is a terrific book. He said, the bad news is it's 71,000 words, and it's not a 1 minute book. So we need to either shorten the book or you need to change your title. Well, we'd worked hard to get the rights to the title and permission and so forth from the Blanchard organization and Spencer Johnson's group. So we just thought we don't want to give up the title, so I guess we'll have to shorten the book. Now, you think it's hard to write a book, you ought to unwrite one. That's where it really gets tough. So we basically got involved with Steve Piersanti in the rewriting process. He said we had to simplify it, shorten it, and that's when together the three of us came up with the EASY formula. And the EASY we'll cover right now. The E stands for engage, and as to what engagement is, the initial engagement tactics are, first of all, get your head in the game. You're going to say to yourself, this is probably a negotiation that's about to be initiated here, and I need to get my head in the game and be prepared for this. Now, the next click on your slide is early speculation of their predictable motives. In other words, what are they up to here? What do they want? What's their desired outcome here? Number 3 is your stance to protect your position. So you're going to be so knowledgeable about negotiations after you learn this content that you're going to be able to protect your position. If it ends up adversarial, you can deal with it. If it ends up win-win, you can deal with that. So that's all good news. So rule number 1, the E of easy is engage.
And the that second part brings us to assess. And why don't you go into, since E is engage and A is assess, why don't you tell us what that means to the 1 minute negotiator?
Okay, so you're working on this preparation idea because preparation is king in negotiations. And easy is helping you prepare to deal with the reality of it. So you're engaged now, your head's in the game, and you're ready to assess their negotiation style. Now, in just a few minutes, we're going to talk about the 4 negotiation styles. But at this point, you're going to be assessing their negotiation style. You're going to see, is this going to be friendly? Is this going to be a tough negotiation? You're also going to be looking at an assessment of the criticality of the negotiation. Terry, the bottom line here is if you've got thousands and thousands of dollars riding on this negotiation, you must attach importance to it. You've got to do the best you can to make sure you cover yourself. On the other hand, if this is something that is of very little importance, you don't want to burn up 10,000 brain cells on a $50 deal. The third thing you're going to assess is what are your options? How are you going to approach this? And what is your next step going to be? So you're considering your options. Those are all part of the assessment. So then we go to the third part of the EASY formula, and that's S. You know enough now that you can begin to strategize. In other words, you've got a pretty fair idea. You've assessed where they are and what their style or approach might be. So to strategize successfully, you're going to analyze current positions. That would be yours and theirs. Next thing up, formulate desired outcomes. What do you want to get out of this? Because it's through a knowledge of your desired outcomes that you can then craft a really good strategized approach here. So do everything you can to not only keep your head in the game, but stay on it and be thinking about this all the way through, and all that's part of the preparation factor that's so critical to succeeding in a negotiation. So you begin to craft your strategy to be successful.
And see, Dr. Lucas, when we worked on this book and the coaching program that went with it, we know that most people don't prepare. They kind of like grit their teeth and go, oh boy, here we go into negotiations. When in fact, when you have this easy strategy, you are able to sit back and not just react, but respond, and that gets you better outcomes. Well, you know, that pretty much brings us around to the why.
Well, we had to do something with the why, so we just seized the opportunity to say, this is your 1-minute drill. Assess, engage, strategize. So that brings us to section 2, and we're approaching the idea now of understanding the matrix we put together. But section 2 covers the 2 dimensions of negotiation strategies. Those are activation and cooperation. The example we love to use, Terry, is when you were a little kid and you were a sibling, or you and a sibling were in an argument, and one of your parents came in and said, who started this? Well, in other words, who activated this this interaction here that's gotten so heated? So activation is a critical point. Who's the one that started the negotiations process? The other factor is cooperation. Is it going to be high or low cooperation? Because these 2 things, these 2 critical factors or dimensions enable us to create a framework for our matrix where we put together the 4 negotiation strategies.
Which brings us to those 4 negotiation strategies. And this is interesting because all of us have been in one of these quadrants some of the time, and we like to start with the one that most of us go towards, which is avoidance.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the framework first. Proactive versus reactive designates who initiated the negotiation versus who is just being brought into it as a result of it being initiated. The other factor is cooperation, with low to the left and high to the right. So the way we explain the 4 resulting quadrants in this matrix are, we start lower left with a combination of 2 factors, reactive and low cooperation. And that enables us to come up with what we call the avoidance quadrant of the matrix. Now, avoidance is, in one case, avoidance is a result of a severe case of negotiaphobia. And the result of that is people stick their head in the sand. Now, avoidance can be a 2-way street. It can be done by you alone to your advantage or disadvantage, or you could become the victim of avoidance. So one type of avoidance is the negative side of, I don't want to get into a negotiation. It's antagonistic. I don't even want to go there. And that's where the negotiaphobia is into play. But there's another type of avoidance we call purposeful avoidance. If you've got a customer who they know that you typically have new pricing late December of every year, and you've been calling him for an appointment, and he's putting you off, and he's not returning your phone calls, it doesn't mean he's not going to keep buying from you. What he's trying to do is prolong the price increase as long as he possibly can. That is an example of purposeful avoidance on the part of the other person. Another example of purposeful avoidance might mean that you, let's go to the next slide, Terry, might mean that you've already got a superior system or option in place. So when is avoidance the answer? When the issue is minimal in nature, not worth the time and resources to openly address, or when a better option is already in hand, like a lower price today rather than an increased price later. So you're going to put off that conversation. So that's an example of how we match the right strategy. So next we have accommodation. That is a combination of reactive behavior like avoidance, but it's high cooperation. Essentially, accommodation is when you give something up. Now, when you give something up, the key is you got to know what you're giving up and recognize the why behind it and the how much behind it, and also think about what you might be able to get in return for it. Or as the copy says there, the key is to know you're doing it and recognize that this strategy does not build relationships. It tests relationships. But most people will accommodate to build relationships, and that's a fallacy, we think.
Well, one of the biggest issues and one of the easiest applications for understanding negotiations is the red, blue, and green chip analogies. And when we talk about in what circumstances you might want to accommodate, that might come into play. Clearly, a red chip is a non-negotiable. It's just a non-negotiable. We have to positively have the product by such and such a date, or we don't need it. And then you've got your blue chips, and that's where you have some give or take according to the book. And then talk to us about, is this where you'd throw in a green chip?
Well, the blue chip is something you really want to try to get. So again, this is all part of preparation and knowing the dynamics of what you stand to lose or gain from this. And the blue chip, you really want to try to get it if you can. The green chip you could give up, especially if it enables you to get something else that you want by giving it up. But we're going to go into the chips in considerable depth in a future show. But back to strategy matching, under what circumstances should you accommodate? A weaker power position that is obvious to all sides and no other options in play. Also, when you or your side have made a material mistake of commission or omission. For example, let's say there was a missed shipment and it didn't get there until 2 days too late for the application of the product on the part of your customer, and they're upset they didn't get it in time. And then you might say, well, you know, in this case, in this special situation, we would like to make a concession to you, and we'd like to accommodate by giving you so-and-so or such and such, and then you give something up, but you've got a reason for it there. You're trying to stay in their good stead after you screwed up. So that would be one example of when you might accommodate. And another example is sometimes, especially in sales, a lot of salespeople just cave too early and they start giving stuff away. And that's a tough one. One of the lines I love to use with salespeople in seminars that management loves is there's some salespeople who would rather try to sell their boss on a price cut than they would to stick to their rate card with their customer. So after accommodation, we've got competition. Now that's in red for a good reason. You really want to beware of competition. You got to be very careful or you might get your clock cleaned. It's low cooperation and it's proactive. In other words, somebody has come at you with a competitive situation, and that's when somebody thinks that there's a fixed pie. It's a win-lose approach driven by skills, knowledge, and nerve. But that fixed pie means that they're going to try to get every morsel of the pie they can, and they can get vicious in the process. And the competition is indeed the derivation of that feeling of antagonism and confrontation that has been stereotypically in place for many years. Now, strategy matching. When should you compete? Well, with an opponent not capable of collaborating. I mean, it's obvious from the outset they want to play hardball. So they either are not capable of collaborating, and they've demonstrated that, or maybe it's one that's not worth the effort due to the relative lack of importance of the issue in question. Also, frequently used for a one-off negotiation with no relationship potential. So if you'll never see these people again, you might want to give it your full effort to get every morsel you can get. In other words, you fully engage in the competition process. So it's just as noble to know how to compete, accommodate, or avoid as it is noble to be a good collaborator. You got to have all 4 skills, because if you don't, you're going to go into battle with an empty quiver. You can't just have one skill. You got to have all 4. And what will sometimes happen is, if somebody wants to play tough with you and really get competitive, if you stand your ground and show your strength of position, sometimes they'll back off and say, wow, I've got a good negotiator here. Maybe I will collaborate with them. So it might change the dynamic of the entire negotiation. Well, collaboration is proactive and high cooperation. Your comment, Terry?
I was just going to say that in a lot of cases, Don, when somebody tries to be competitive, we've learned from your book and from our VT training and the people that we coach that sometimes people come on competitively because they think that's what they have to do, when in fact they really are looking to be collaborative. And so just because somebody comes out fighting doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to end there. But when they see that you are working towards collaboration, that may not be their main style. So don't give up right away and don't be put off by the competitive. Try to go for collaboration. And this, you said, is the most advanced of all the strategies.
Exactly. So here's what's required for a collaboration. Before strategy matching, think about this for a minute. Collaboration can be very pleasant. It can be very time-consuming, because a really good collaboration is going to happen over time as you build trust and work closely with the people on the other side of the table. And you've got to be really committed to collaboration, and you got to know the skills to be able to do it. So in strategy matching, what situations call for collaboration? Well, I would say a significant opportunity comes into play. Maybe this can be a huge account for you, with a capable and willing decision-making team on all sides of the table. So these are people, they're willing to discuss, they're willing to listen, they're willing to partner with you in coming up with a good outcome. And collaboration in and of itself means let's cooperate, let's proactively get involved in a manner that's going to come up with a win-win here. So philosophically, Terry, collaboration means let's don't fight over every morsel of a fixed pie. Let's all get creative. Let's create a bigger pie, because who knows where this relationship could go. With your intellect and our intellect being combined, we can really come up with something that can be a long-term, huge win for both of us over time.
Of course, that's a great opportunity for you to start value stacking, which you wrote so well in Selling Value, because that's where you can really make that long-term so valuable and so attractive, irresistible, that they really don't want to work with anybody but you. But I think a lot of people,
right.
Sometimes they confuse being collaborative with compromise.
Well, that can happen, but collaboration is really very different from compromise. Collaboration is the arena in which we are able to create high-trust relationships. In other words, we want to be a trusted advisor and we want to really work well with people. That's all collaboration. That's where all that comes about. The tactic of compromise, and keep in mind we use the word tactic because it is not a strategy. It is indeed a tactic. So what is compromise? We think it's vastly overused, it's frequently abused, and it's a negotiation tactic. It is nothing more than a simple mathematical calculation. Now, people go there, and they go there too early many times, Terry, because it's the one technique they've heard about. Well, you know, let's compromise on this. Well, if you go there too early and there's a big deviation between your position and theirs, and you do an immediate compromise, you might give away way too much. You might have left a lot of revenue on the table. So going to the next slide, let's look at what it might really be and how we're going to deal with it. If we're going to use compromise, I'm going to suggest that you do 3 things. Use it when, number 1, it is late in the negotiations process. So seemingly, you would have narrowed the gap in your negotiations through your processes of talking to them and understanding where they're coming from and working closely with them and communicating as well as you possibly can. So go there late in the process. Number 2, go there when the positions are close. Because if you've now been working through this and you've gotten your positions much closer, when you compromise, you're going to be giving up less than you otherwise would. And number 3, do it when you can tie it into the confirmation of closure. Okay, in other words, you say, all right, why don't we split the difference and make this a done deal? And you reach your hand out to shake hands with them. Presumably when they shake hands, they're saying, okay, done deal. So we tie it to the confirmation and we're done. I'd say the biggest thing to be aware of, Terry, is going into compromise too early, because you can lose a lot if you're not careful.
And that seems to be the one thing that salespeople will do, especially if they're trying to make their numbers. They start thinking, well, I'm going to sweeten the pot. Anybody that has studied negotiations, and this, by the way, when he talks about preparation, is no matter what you learn from this, it's all about preparation. Find out what their real needs are. Separate their needs from their wants. That's that blue chip, red chip whole paradigm. And by the way, that's available in the U.S. Learning Virtual Training Network program that we have, and of course in the book. But another issue that we have is that a lot of people don't even ask. Women especially, Don, don't ask. And before we go into our 1-minute tips, I want to add that if you happen to be a woman in business or working with a woman in business, one of the issues is their high adaptability. And high adaptability is it's just a great thing to have. Bad part about that is sometimes in that adaptability, we will forget to ask for what we really want, and we're going to assume that people figure that out. The other issue with women in negotiating is that they will assume that the negotiation is done on a handshake. And Dr. Lucas and Don Hudson will tell you it's not done until everything is signed on the dotted line. One of the bonuses we're going to give you today in this coaching program is the issue of nibbling. Don, why don't you talk to what happens when the other side is agreed and then continues to ask for things?
Well, just remember, when you get that handshake, go ahead and get the name on the dotted line as soon as you possibly can. Nibbling is a subtle yet very effective tactic by which one person will kind of nibble. They say, now you are going to throw in no-cost shipping on this, aren't you? And they're nibbling after you've already agreed on the price. And the salesperson might say, well, yeah, we'll do that, in which case he has just been nibbled. Or they might say, well, of course, we got to charge shipping, especially at these prices that we've agreed to. So you either hold your own or you back off. So you can become the victim of nibbling. And if there's a long time frame between the time of the handshake and the time of signing the deal, you might get nibbled 8 times. And it could add up to a lot. So be careful about that. But I would also say, Terry, to your point, and some of the research you did on the women in negotiating has been so terrific and helpful. But I want to say, regardless of the position you're in, if you can be a really good communicator and ask a lot of good questions and be a good listener, that can be enormously valuable to you in negotiating. So all that is a part of preparation, and it's a part of strategy as you go through the process.
Well, we're going to go into the quick 1-minute tips. We do want to tell everybody on the call, thanks for joining us. We have a great gift as we close out the call. I just want to review a couple of 1-minute insights on negotiaphobia. It is a widespread and frequently unrecognized affliction that negatively impacts people, and not just professional, but in your personal lives. And today's business world is more challenging than ever before, but with good negotiation skills, you can get positive results and not cut into that bottom line. Now, we know that business development professionals are always being held accountable, not only for revenue, but for profitability. And those little nibbles that Don's just been talking about, over time, especially if you're working with the same account, can really cost you some money. And, until you're like not in business or not alive, you're going to need to always negotiate. And as we get global competition where they negotiate every day and we don't, you're going to want to be able to be better at what you do. And the only way to do that is to invest in either reading or a course or coaching or whatever. And so what we've got coming up here are some 1-minute tips on what you can deploy right away to help you do better at negotiating, whether it's with your kids, your family, or your professional life. So, Don, why don't we start off with the first obvious one, which is to become a good negotiator.
Yeah, we want to recommend you work diligently to become a proficient negotiator. And by that, be willing to learn. Study this. Think about it. Even in settings where it doesn't matter as much, practice your negotiation skills. Maybe with your dry cleaner, they say, Tuesday after lunch, okay, you might say, you know what, I really need this Tuesday morning. Could you make that happen for me? Just to practice your negotiations, if for no other reason. There's nothing manipulative about that. You're just learning your skill. Also, we love to ask people in a seminar, also in our coaching, what books have you read on negotiations? How many of you read a book? Well, there'll be times when very few people even raise their hand. Most people have stayed away from this content through the years because they deem it or visualize it as unpleasant. So I would like to recommend you put forth a campaign. I hope you've read The 1 Minute Negotiator. If not, get a copy and do so right away. But there's some other great books out there on negotiation. Become a student of it. The books will be free, believe me. You're going to have a new profit center because you're going to be a better negotiator than ever before.
Obviously, we want to get you to consider practicing. Don said with your dry cleaner, that's a great thing. The one thing you've got to learn, the tip there, Don, that we give our coaching clients is when you say, can I have it Tuesday morning, don't say anything, because typically we want to fill that space. Just hold on, hold back, and don't say anything until they wait. Okay, obviously hiring a coach is going to help you a lot. And then you know what, Don, there's so much downloadable free tips and secrets out there. But there's a couple of other quick tips here that you want to kind of punctuate before we let everybody go.
Well, I've said it several times on this call. There is no substitute for preparation. It's like people who tell me, I'm scared to death, I got to give a speech. I said, well, just remember, if you prepare it with great detail and you know what you're going to say in sequence, maybe you don't have it written down verbatim, but if you just got bullet points and you're well thought out, you're going to be fine. And in negotiations, if we just prepare and think about what our approach is going to be and study what our options might be, it's going to be a nice payoff for us. Know your own tendencies and plan for the other person's tendencies is also important. Next is the foundation for successful collaboration is a problem-solving approach that generates advanced discovery. What does that mean? Lots of questions, lots of needs analysis, lots of probing, sharing information about what's important to you, gathering information about what's important to them. That's the only way we can really craft collaborative win-win outcomes. Silence is often the strongest tool in your negotiations toolbox. Well, it's a great skill to have, and Ken Blanchard and I in the 1 Minute Entrepreneur, you'll recall, Terry, we talked about the importance of leading with your ears. It's such a great skill. So many times we want to talk, and we don't listen nearly enough. So it's a great skill.
Not only that, Don, but we don't hear what they're saying. I mean, sometimes, not that you have to be a shrink or anything, but you want to know what the real issue is. When you do your selling value, and he says, is that the only problem? When you isolate the real, what's the real issue behind the issue, then you can really react and respond in a way that is value in their eyes, because it's not always price, and we talk about that. And then, and it's hard for especially salespeople not to say anything, Don. I just got to tell you, it's hard.
Well, if you use the Negotiaphobia treatment process every time, you can make things easy on yourself. Now, let me say this about Negotiaphobia and the treatment. You notice we do not call it a cure. We call it a treatment because I'm not sure anybody ever totally gets over their Negotiaphobia. We just get to a point where we can treat it and we can deal with it much better than we might have previously. So just make it part of your preparation. Do everything you can to learn the options and the things you can do. Use your easy formula every time you can, and that's going to be very helpful.
Well, Don, we try to be very true to our time frame because we want to be able to give them 1 minute during the time that it takes to have a little bit of lunch, and we want you to share with us your negotiation successes, failures, challenges, whatever. Just go to on Twitter at US Learning or at Don Hudson Live. We do have some downloadable podcasts available for you at no cost at uslearning.com. There's plenty of videos on YouTube. We have articles everywhere. And, of course, if you're really serious about better negotiations, please check out our Master Negotiation Skills at www.uslearning, V as in Victor, T as in Tom, VT.com, because that's where you're going to get some great information. And you can also, if you're looking to book Don Hudson or the US Learning team, just give us a call at the US Learning or donhudson.com or uslearningvt.com. Here is our platform for US Learning VT. We have both selling value, negotiation skills, and of course leadership. And so I'd like to open it up for questions if we've got any, Don. Miss Rebecca has got us on, and then we'll be able to give away our free gift here. Rebecca, do we have anything specific there?
We do. We have a question from Hugh Don. It's a long one, so I'm going to get it all out to you, and then you'll be able to answer it. When is it time to quit and walk away? If the prospect is unwilling to meet our least acceptable outcome, how often does taking a deal away result in the prospective client wanting our product or service more?
Well, it depends on how much is on the line, Hugh. When is it time to walk away? Just think about what is at stake here. If I'm able to secure a reasonable and acceptable side of this negotiation, even if it takes me another week or a month to get it done, what's the upside for me? And that'll help us as we evaluate upside to think about how much more energy do we want to put in it. Makes me think of the old Zig Ziglar story about his buddy when he was a kid in Alabama who was pumping that old water pump they found out in the field. And he pumped it for about 7-8 minutes, and the guy said, boy, this is hard, I'm going to quit. And the guy said, no, don't quit now. That water might be almost to the top now. Well, hey, in negotiations, sometimes we don't even realize when we're almost done. They might be just about to concede what it is that we think is the most valuable outcome for us. So, the better our skills, the better off we're going to be in trying to get those outcomes over a period of time.
I'd like to add to that, Hugh, as we study both generational dynamics and cross-cultural dynamics, one of the things that we noticed, and we didn't specify here, but if you're dealing with a client who is not local, very often that's just part of their strategy. So I would say this, and I know that Dr. Lucas often referred to this, and that is, walk away when you cannot live with that transaction or that deal, as he likes to call it. If every time that deal comes up it makes you sick to your stomach, it's not worth it. If you walk away, you don't walk away mad. You just say, you know what, I know at some point we'll be able to work something out. In this case, it just doesn't work for us. We're both good business people. I just can't make that happen at this time, but you know what, I'll keep you posted, and perhaps if I can ever help you, you come back. Sometimes when you do what we call the takeaway close, they might come around because they are just playing hardball to figure out how far they can go. Again, there's several factors that are involved, but I think at the end of the day, if you don't feel good about it and it's not going to do you any good, and every single time that particular order comes through, it makes you ill, I would say walk, but walk nicely. Would that be accurate? Hey, Rebecca, do we have another question?
We do.
Hey, one other thought for Hugh. Don't burn any bridges, Hugh.
Yeah.
You never know when you might need to re-engage with them at a later time.
Good point, Don. Go ahead, Rebecca.
We have a great question in from Jim that could kind of create an awkward situation. He asks, what if both parties are using silence and no one is responding?
Well, you know what? You can have a little fun with it. You can snicker and say, June, are you still there? Somebody said one time years ago, the first one that talks loses. So try to maintain that silence when you think it's important to do so. But generally, that's not a problem. The problem is people talking on top of each other, not both being quiet. So I don't think you'll have to deal with that very much.
Well, and if you do, though, here's the thing. When somebody's silent, if you know, Jim, that they're doing that to use that tactic, you might just say, well, clearly we need some more information here. Why don't we just get back to each other? Again, that takeaway close is, I hate to use it as a tactic, but it works because somebody realizes that you're not going to be able to sleep overnight. You know what I'm saying? So if you suspect that they're using it as a tactic instead of they are truly an analytical personality that needs that time to make that decision, just offer it to them and say, listen, obviously you need some time or more information to think about this. Why don't we just get back to each other tomorrow or at a different time? I would only do that when I suspect they're playing hardball with silence. I hope that helps. Well, Ms. Rebecca, what else do we have?
Looks like that's what we have. If anyone else has any other questions, you can go ahead and shoot them in, and we'll interject them before we end today. And you can always ask us a question online at US Learning or at Don Hudson Live, both on Twitter and Facebook, and we'll get those answers to you there as well.
Well, for those of you who chose to improve yourselves today and improve the outcome in your bottom line, we've got a great little program that we put together for you. Rebecca, our specialist, helped create a negotiation tactical toolbox. And if you go to uslearning.com/gift, you can download this toolbox and carry it around with you. It's designed to be quick tips and strategies and kind of a re-up of what you just learned. Of course, if you're really serious about it, you might want to take an online course for less than 9 minutes a day. You could be on your way to better negotiations at uslearningvt.com. And I would also like you to take this time to mark your calendar. We're going to have our next coaching and consulting session on Wednesday, June the 10th, same time, same station. And we're going to be putting together a couple of series because it's clear that we can't be doing the fullest extent of content in 36 minutes. It's designed to help refresh, reboot, reignite, and revitalize your professional competencies here. Don, do you have any closing tips for everybody before they go off and negotiate even better than they did before the call?
I think the number one thing, Terry, is preparation is going to help you get over your negotiaphobia. Become a student of negotiations. It'll be a whole new profit center for you. And best of luck in all your endeavors.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Again, if you've got any questions, Rebecca, myself, and Don Hudson will be happy to answer them. Just go to our site at VT or at our Facebook page. And thanks again. Talk to you next month. Make it a great one.
Glad you could be with us.